Come on! Jack Scotti. Finally got him on the podcast. Jack, welcome to the
I've been
show,
on
my
one
guy.
before. This is my second time, so I'm
Oh,
not
wait.
in.
When did I have you on before?
Uh, it might have been in the beginning of 2020. We were talking about like the season format and stuff like that.
Oh, did I have you on like before the podcast days, but like it was a Twitch stream and talking about
Okay,
that
okay,
kind of
yeah.
stuff? Yeah, okay, cool. Gotcha. Yeah, that's right. We did do that. Yeah. So that was a good one. Well, so much for a 2020 format, huh?
It wasn't what anyone planned. Let's put it that way.
No, it definitely wasn't. Definitely an atypical year for everyone, for the community. Um, what was this year like, behind the scenes for competitive? I know that, from an outward appearance, I'm sure a lot of people are just like, Spikeball took the year off, but I know better than that. And so, what kind of things did you guys do, beginning of COVID, once you realized that this was all over, and then, moving forward to close out the year?
Well, I mean, it was obviously very disappointing, especially anyone who runs tournaments or organizes things knows that probably the greatest percentage of the work is in the preparation for it. And then
Hmm.
there's a ton of work on the day of executing, doing all that stuff. But really, you do a ton of the work ahead of time. And so basically, we had, a lot of updates this season, a lot of new things we were excited about, seeing how they worked and rolling out. And we didn't get to do any of those. But we put in all the work to plan the locations, the events, the formats, that sort of thing. And so to watch that get washed away is super sad and disappointing. And it wasn't just like it happened all at once. It was like this tide that was coming in and out. So we're like, okay, well, maybe things will get better and we can readjust the format to do this. And so we go through all the work again of like, where are even things like Team USA qualifiers going to be, or how's it going to work? Like some of those things changed 4 or 5 times, and we booked 4 or 5 different locations. And like, I mean, some of it we booked and we never even released because we're like, let's hold off, and we don't want to get people's expectations set too high until we know for sure we can do it. But it was a lot of planning, replanning, and then ultimately just having to let it go. So that was tough. It was really tough. I think probably one of the hardest things was Worlds because,
Hmm.
I mean, I was super excited about that. I think everybody was. And it was one of those, this is the first time we're doing it. We were so excited about what it was going to be. There was a lot of fun surprises we had for the event and still do for 2021. But the fact that couldn't happen, each year I kind of try to think of like, hey, what's the one thing where if we were putting a timeline together and we're like, oh, this year in Roundnet history marks this thing, oh, we were on ESPN. Oh, we had a college national championship. And like 2020 to me was going to be, this year had a world championship, and that was going to be the defining moment. And so to have to pull the plug on that for this year and reschedule for next, that was tough. But like, what other things happened aside from doing work and then rework and then throwing out work? It did give us a lot of time to, learn more and plan more and really talk to some members of the community. So, for instance, for me, college is just a huge growth driver of the sport. It to me is the thing that makes it sustainable, that like creates this pipeline. And once you get that club formed, it's, if you do it in the right way, if you build a sustainable club, if you have it so that the seniors pass it down to the underclassmen, that's just something that grows and becomes more powerful. Once you invest the time in doing it officially, like doing the paperwork, getting funds from your school to be able to travel, that just grows and perpetuates and gets better and better. So one thing I wanted to do was to talk to college club founders and better understand, what is it that made you want to found a club? Like, what are the dominoes that need to fall to make this happen, to move it beyond just hey, we're this group of friends that has, a group chat and meets up every once in a while, to, yeah, we're the official Roundnet club of the school. We have jerseys, we have funding, we travel, we go to, the club activity night, because those are the things that really make the difference. So we worked on these things. It's called jobs to be done interviews, but it's basically trying to understand why are you hiring this thing to be part of your life? Why are you hiring a college club? Like, what job does it serve for you?
That's a cool way to like think about that too. Like
Yeah,
I would have never thought about it as like an interview process, but like it kind of is. Like and you're taking on a responsibility, and like why are some people doing it? Why are other people less inclined or not willing to go the extra step in making it so official?
exactly. And a lot of times what you find out is that the assumption or the answer that you thought is completely different than the actual like motivating factors. So we did
Interesting.
this with college club founders, and we also did it with a group of RRO founders, because to
Mm-hmm.
me, like, those two are kind of analogous. The thing, RROs really help grow the sport in sort of like the open series. College clubs are like a key metric in the college department. So what we found from talking to these and doing these like really in-depth interviews was a lot of, and I'll tell you my assumptions before I got into it. I
Mm-hmm.
thought, hey, you know what? We need more people before they get to college playing in a tournament. We need them playing organized in high school. We need them playing more tournaments. We need them knowing about Roundnet and thinking about joining a college club before they even get there. We want those people to be like motivated to represent their school and play against other schools. Like, that's what we need to get more club founders, is to get them in the competitive spirit before they show up at college, before they arrive on campus that first day.
That sounds
And
reasonable.
yeah, long story short, I was pretty far off. So the more people I talked to, the more I realized a lot of folks, you are obviously super close to the community. You know everything that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people that are in the same conversation channels, like, know when a comma changes on a page that has, like, it's crazy how close some people follow. But Roundnet in general has a ton of people that know about it, but a small amount of people that follow as closely as folks like you and me.
Mm-hmm.
So even some of these club founders, when I was hearing their stories, they didn't know there was like a college series. They didn't know there were tournaments when they founded the club.
Wow.
Not like when before they started playing, not when they whatever. When they founded a club around the sport, they didn't even really know all the extent of what the sport was.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I talked to people and realized, hey, why are you doing the things you're doing? It really was, they wanted Roundnet to be their thing. And that's kind of like where the idea for this college hype video came from.
I see.
Yeah, it's not as much about the competition. It's about the way this sport brings people together, creates friendships, is so like inviting and inclusive and fun. And it's like, well, what if you could make videos to show off what that looks like on campus? Wouldn't that make more people want to make Roundnet their thing? It's like, all right, well, how do we do that? All right, let's make these videos. Let's like really promote them. Let's like, in a time where we can't have intercollegiate competition, let's do a digital version of that,
Mm-hmm.
where it isn't about who has the best reverse cut serve. It's like, what club would you, if you were incoming freshman, where would you want to go to school because you want to be part of that club? And that's what that was all about. Those, like, a learning like that, taken from just really talking to a bunch of influential people in the community, and finding out cool stuff. And at the end of the day, I think there was something like 97,000 votes for the college hype video.
That's crazy.
And the SRA Instagram channel, which it ran through, only started with like 5,000 followers, right?
Mm-hmm.
It grew like 20% just from that one campaign alone.
Whoa.
But got from 5,000 followers, got 97,000 votes. And it's kind of cool to be able to see, like, okay, when we have the time to to like look into these things to figure out what are the real drivers. Sometimes the real drivers are much different than what they seem on the surface. And sometimes we can make a really big impact just by better understanding, what are these motivating factors. So that was a cool sort of research project, then turned into like a campaign that got great results that, probably wouldn't have happened had like the season gone as we planned, just because it took a ton of time to do, but
Mm-hmm.
led to many, many things that we didn't know before we started.
Yeah. No, well, it's interesting that you bring that up too, because like I feel like as you're trying to create, a structure for college in order to, feed the sport and grow it, you almost think that the answer to doing this has to also be structural, where you're like, oh, well, in order to get, a structure for college, like there's got to be a structure for high school, or we got to figure out how to get those kids to a tournament so that they'll want to do a structure. And the answer really kind of resonates with me because like back in the day when I was playing in 2010, before there was even a competitive scene, like we started a club at Indiana University in 2010 and quickly gave up on it after freshman year and just started playing ourselves. But we did it because we were passionate about it and we thought it was cool and we thought it would be a reason to meet other freshmen. So like, yeah, I guess why would that really be any different now for all of these people? Like, especially in college, like it's such a like, finding yourself, finding your community type of thing. Of course, that plays such a big role in it. But, I think as we get further and further away from our college days, maybe we just kind of forgot that and we're like, it's got to be structure. It's got to be, that kind of answer.
Well, the most important thing that we saw was that if you want someone to found a college club, put in the work, the real crucial element needs to happens in every case. They run across somebody else that they didn't know ahead of time that also shares their love for it. And they're like, I didn't know you existed. I didn't know these other people were out there. And then what happens when that small group gets together and they show up at the club activity night, these stories are crazy. They're getting 500 people to sign up at one night. They're blowing out every other club on campus in terms of like people who are signing up. And somebody just needed to put the flag up of like, hey, we're here. Like, this is how you find us. Because people are going into college and not even thinking about like, they think, oh, I'm probably the only one that plays, or no one else is thinking about this the way I do.
Mm-hmm.
And when you create those opportunities to make it easier to find those like-minded people, like get your tribe, find your tribe, like that's the real thing. It's not so much about, oh, we have to recruit these top athletes or position it this way or that way. It's about just like bringing people together and making those connections easier. And I think what's cool about like the colleges creating those sort of videos is like, yeah, they put them into a contest, but now like they can use that's like evergreen content that they can roll it at the activity night. They can send it out to, their high school and get people excited about, applying to that college. And that's a crazy thing to me, is that people are actually considering now how they choose their undergraduate university based on what sort of Roundnet program it has. So it's just like wild that we're kind of at that point. And I can't wait till, it becomes like, hey, now you're getting paid, the school's covering your tuition because you got the best cut serve in the nation and you're a 5-star recruit.
I know. Well, but like even before that, like I think it is so true that there are people that are like actively considering like where they go based on, where some other kids are going and where they're going to have, a solid college scene to kind of grow into and develop through. And I know that like if I were going to college right now, like I never considered going to Texas A&M before, but I would be I'd be applying there and maybe doing a campus visit and seeing what kind of goes on there, because like they just put together a structure and they've got a club of dedicated players that are all doing the same things, and you see the dividends that pay off from that. Like, Texas A&M started with a couple of decent guys and now like they're all killers down there. And
Yeah.
there's countless other examples of this too. But yeah, I just I wish that I was able to have this experience 10 years ago, and I'm kind of jealous of all that. Like
Well,
I thought
I
about
think
this when we
you
were
got some, I think you got some guys, and maybe you could follow this path as well. I think
Mhm.
there's some people in grad school not to, pursue a master's or doctorate, whatever, just to like extend their eligibility to keep playing. So
You know what?
maybe you'll find whatever subject you want to, pursue to get you a couple years in the college scene.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly would at this point. Like, I remember being at the college national championship last year or 2 years ago now, and or no, it was last year, right? In
2019.
April. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so and I just remember going like, man, I'm so jealous that I'll never get to compete in this. Like, I'll like that's just that. Like, I'm past it. That I'm past that experience, and it's cool to have all the other stuff too, but um yeah, like every college student should just be thankful that like they get this. Like this didn't exist 10 years ago. It just didn't.
Yeah, and my version of it when I was in college was ultimate frisbee. Like that
Hmm.
was my round net, right? Like those were my friends. They were like aside from just like playing the sport, that was my whole social scene. And my entire goal was just to have our team or have our club qualify for nationals each year.
Hmm.
Um, and to like kind of see that become a thing in Roundnet and see how the colleges are grouping up. I'm like, that's awesome because that was my experience with Ultimate playing competitively of just like you dedicate every free minute you have. You're watching videos, you're talking about it, you're having parties, with these people that just share this passion. But it's more than just about playing. It's about like it's a whole culture basically, and that's what Roundnet's becoming. And it's great to see it sort of like infiltrate all these different areas where like a few years ago you didn't have that opportunity for it to be your college thing. Now you do.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of infiltrating other places, I mean, we've seen the sport really grow internationally over the last couple of years, and there's been a lot of organizing around that. And I guess the other project that you guys were really working on this year was the forming of the IRF, the International Roundnet Federation. Tell me a little bit about that whole process. This was done relatively in secret. Like, I know you guys have always kind of wanted to do this, and you guys have been talking about like, yo, we want to see Roundnet in the Olympics, and I think some people were kind of like, it's one of those, like, gets the people going type of sentences. But like, no, you guys have really wanted this to be a reality for a while, and now it's like kind of the first steps.
Yeah, and like you said, it's been a conversation I think since the first ball bounced off a net of like, wouldn't this be amazing to see this in the Olympics?
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of steps to get there. I think any sport that ever takes itself seriously as a sport has said that or thought about it or put that out as a goal. But then you have to go beyond that. There are things you have to do to kind of put you on that track. And so we knew there were certain things that needed to happen. And honestly, it goes pretty far back. So, when we announced the World Championships at 2019 Nationals, even before then, we were thinking about all of these pieces that kind of fit together. So I've been having conversations with different leaders of international sports, like, talking like the World Flying Disc Federation, things like that. And just, trying to learn from them really of just like, how did you get to where you are?
Mm-hmm.
And what were, what were the right decisions you made? What were the mistakes you made? Cause I'm trying to just like learn from everyone I can of how we can get on this trajectory and make it as fast as possible. And one of the things that I got out of that conversation was just this strong recommendation is like, start with the world championship. Like start by building that track record. You have to, even if everything's not organized exactly how it should be, even if the formats aren't right, even if you don't have everything in place, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Mm-hmm.
Start like get things moving. And I was like, wow, that's great advice. And, that conversation happened, well in advance of nationals where we actually announced that we were going to do a world championship and we were planning that for a bit. But the idea also, when we talk about like, a lot of the season being washed away, even though the world championship didn't happen this year, a lot of the positive effects did, because when I was talking, to the president of World Flying Disc Federation, and he was really urging us to, get a world championships in the books however you can just to get it started. The thing he said is like, it's not just about having the event. It's not just about crowning a champion. It's the way that it kind of, an event like that kind of sets the bar. And, you know, you
Mm-hmm.
want to also with that, have it be a motivating factor for countries to get organized, for people to come together to be able to figure out how we're going to select a national team. And in many ways, even though the event didn't happen, there's been so many formations and strengthened bonds within different countries that, you know, were more loosely organized before there was this big thing that they're aiming for, you know, this thing to train for, this thing to rise up to. And so even though it didn't happen, like the organization, the people coming together, that made a huge step forward in 2020. And yeah, like, is the RRO format like the perfect end state model? No, it wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
but it's progress. Like, it's people getting organized. And, you know, a step along that way to progress is, right, RRO is kind of a sponsorship. You know, it's a, hey, we at Spikeball see you as a great organization regionally, nationally, whatever sort of jurisdiction you have. We want to help connect you with other groups. We want to help promote what you're doing. We want to support what you're doing. But we knew that like it wasn't also the end state. Like, we also need more of a national governing body, which the RRO isn't. And so these are all things that we were thinking about from that point of like, okay, well, getting RROs is great, but eventually they need to turn, like, RRO can still exist, but we also need national governing bodies, and we need, you know, an international federation that can organize all of that, and that needs to be, you know, distinct. And so, yeah, it was, and there's a lot, obviously, a ton more steps we need to take. But it's this idea of like, let's make the progress we can make. Let's keep moving it in the right direction. Let's really set those big goals, because that is a catalyst for everything else to happen quicker and get us where we want to be. So there isn't so much waiting around to make things perfect. And I think, like, you know, you on the SRA board, you have probably a similar experience with rules, and seeing conversations around rules.
Mm-hmm.
We all want perfect rules, right? But like, we also understand, like, when we can find something that's better than the rule we have, we make that change, because we don't want the perfect rule to get away in the way of a better rule, right? So I think it's like this similar dilemma of shared vision and like, how do we get there as fast as we can? And I'm really excited about the progress we've made, and just like, it to me is one of the coolest things that you know, has happened in sort of like, we're looking at the timeline of events within Roundnet. I'm like, this is a cool one. This is a cool time to be part of the community.
Yeah, I mean, it is just wild to think about how different things are from 5 years ago, organization wise. When like, you know, we had a like my first experience with the like bigger structure of Spikeball at the time was like going to Midwest regionals, which went from Minnesota to Texas, and that was all one region somehow. And you know, we got 50 teams together, and we felt really good about that. And that was as organized as we could possibly be. And now we're, you know, putting together uh, all these different you know, teams of people all across the world, and organizing that into something that eventually becomes the Olympics. And like you said, like, it's kind of putting that structure in place and inspiring people to then do even more with that structure, and create even more structure than under it. Like, hopefully this is something that gets, you know, a country more organized, but then there are other areas within that country getting more organized underneath them, and maybe they're recognizing their own round net organizations, and not just the company itself. I think that's super cool. And so, like, in this process, what countries have you kind of like worked with so far, and who's kind of doing the right things, as far as you can tell?
Well, I think, like, I mean, we have such a great community, and I think everybody has a shared mission. Like, I think everyone's excited about this idea of what sort of potential we have, where we can go, and the fact that, like, yeah, saying we're aiming at the Olympics is certainly ambitious for anybody, but it also doesn't feel unrealistic. Like,
Right.
it's something that takes a long time, but it doesn't feel like this thing that's going to be impossible. It feels like, hey, I'm excited to do this work that we need to do to get us there. It was cool because in the process of planning Worlds for 2020, I had, gotten to know the Belgium guys a lot better, and they're great. I love working with them. The board is Frey from Belgium, Gabby from Czech Republic, Martine from Chile, Kayla from Canada, and myself from the US. But there's so many groups that are just doing awesome things. Even like, it's hard to get on calls with Australia because of the time zone difference,
Right.
but they are amazing in Australia. And it doesn't, I send out the doodle of like, hey, we're trying to get a bunch of people together to, talk about whatever international thing. And I never give that, like, it just never works out that they have a convenient time, right?
Yeah.
And so he'll check a couple times, whatever, and then send me a separate email. He's like, listen, I put what was best for me, but honestly, I'm going to be there. I don't care if it's 4 a.m. And this guy has, you know, 3 kids, and he's on this, like, a Zoom call at 4 a.m. just because he loves it so much and wants to see the sport grow. And it was like, he really gets it because there's this cat and mouse sort of game, like chicken and egg thing, where he wants Australia to be able to see what Roundnet is and really value it, and why they should fund some things, why they should get behind it, why they should be excited about, like, promoting a national team and recognizing it as a sport. And like, so he understands the IRF as like, wow, this really helps me make my case to them. Like, look at where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the cool thing, is that, it works in both of the directions, as Roundnet picks up in different countries, as more countries and recognize the sport, from their top sporting level, whether that's like the National Olympic Committee or whatever their top sporting agency is. It just works back and forth, and lets us do more. It lets those countries get more funding. It lets them hopefully countries are like, they're contributing to send teams to Worlds, because they understand that, like, hey, what other new sport can we break out in and have this great representation? Like, it's a cool opportunity. And hopefully, with putting a little more structure around it, it lets these groups that are trying to make a name for themselves get a little bit more legitimacy, and show how it's all connected in a big picture way that could reflect really positively on their country, like when they bring home a world championship or something like that.
Yeah, God, it's just cool to think about, like, everyone else's passions everywhere, and like it's super relatable too, to like think about where other countries are in their journey is kind of where some of us were a little, a couple of years ago, and that, like, that initial excitement of opportunity, and I just can't even imagine having that, that like new sense of passion for the sport with all of these opportunities out there. Like, yeah, I'd be getting on the call at 4 a.m. too. Of course I would. And I'd be wanting to build something, and I'd be then, trying to, get in touch with whoever I had to in my country to make this like a huge thing. So
And
it's cool because, like, you're creating opportunity and, like, building passion within someone. You're giving them the reason.
I would
It's
say, like, one thing that I think we're bad about as, like, Americans in Roundnet is thinking we're so much further along. And yeah,
right.
like, we started years and years earlier because we had the equipment before other people did. So
Hmm.
we do have that advantage. But I think an interesting thing to think about is when you watch, like, some of the tournament videos and highlight videos coming out today, and like the names of players where you're like, wait, who is this new guy? And
Yeah.
people are in their basement like crafting the next new thing, the next new strategy. And that is not restricted by, a border. Like, I think that, especially with like play being slowed down, there's just some people just working on their craft. And I think that there can be a lot of surprises. And I think that, as like a Team USA, we need to make sure we're not complacent, because there's definitely people all over the world, gunning for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we definitely can't be complacent. Like when I went over to Denmark last year, I was really expecting to just roll everybody, and that really wasn't the case. Like games were far more competitive than you would have ever imagined, and on top of that, like their growth rate has just been so much higher than ours. Like we had to kind of go through this, like, all right, like we raised the bar to here, and now we compete here. And now we raise the bar to here, and then we compete here, and like when they learned the game, they just learned it at like, oh, you get to here, and so they just like like took a straight line right there, and we're like, oh, this is what we do. Like, it's crazy that people are like starting the game going like, yeah, I need to like learn how to serve by learning how to implement spin on the ball, like side spin, like. That was like no one was thinking about that in 2015. No one was thinking about the like being able to hit backwards in 2014 to the degree that we do now. And so it's really raised the bar and like closed the gap, and to the point that like watching the European National Championship last year, I was like, these guys can compete with all of our premier teams, like all of them. And they started years afterwards. It's wild.
Yeah, and I think the other cool sort of like transfer or handoff is, you know, sometimes we get stuck in our status quo. Oh, we always play our games like this, or organize things like that, or have this schedule, this whatever. And it's just cool to see people who haven't been so indoctrinated in like the way it's done, and you're like, wow, there's a cool different way to do it, and it's not better or worse, it's different. Like, I think that's an important thing we need to just keep in mind as a community, is like, there doesn't always have to be a value judgment on like one right way. It's really cool to see different ways things have been organized, run, and even like the way people play around with rules and stuff. I think that is something that's going to help our sport grow. And like, I'm excited just to get more viewpoints, part of that conversation, and like seeing what other people do. And I think like another sort of like silver lining to a canceled season is how much independent events innovate, and we're able to like take ownership, and just try different things. And I think that's awesome. Like, I think we're going to learn stuff from that. And, the way things get better is somebody does something good, you just steal the best thing that's out there. But the thing you need to happen is people taking risks, trying different stuff. And, some stuff's going to fail, and like, it's okay. Part of like failure can be part of success. Like, that's what you need to be okay taking risks. And I think that the situation we're in has brought that out. And like, I think we've actually gained a lot from it.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. And I think that above all else, like with our options so limited in gathering as a community, like we really have found ways to come together in new ways, and even across borders, and just down to the local level of just encouraging people to play locally, organize locally. And yeah, I think all of that stuff is just going to make us think about the sport a little bit differently, and hopefully those gains travel with us into when we finally return to some semblance of a normal SRA season here in the U.S. at least. So that's cool stuff.
Yeah, and like, we are even thinking about our SRA season differently. Obviously, there's a lot that is on it. Like, we don't know what's going to happen, and we're going to have to play it by ear a little bit. But yeah, I mean, like, what's more radical than canceling a whole season? Like, that's how I think about it sometimes. Like, that's actually like the most radical thing you could do. We didn't have any events. So like, it almost feels like, hey, you know what? The structure we have, like, let's not hold it as sacred of like, oh no, don't change this little thing. Like, it was radical to not have anything. Now, if we think we have something that can be better than the way it was, like, let's go for it. So, when we're thinking about this season, one of the things we changed, which I don't know why, like it seems to make total sense now, but like, uh, in the past, we would really schedule around, we'd make our schedule, um, and we'd pick the places we want, and then we'd try to find the venues. And this year, we're like, wait, that's not really the right way to do it. There's so many people that want to have us as like cities, tourism bureaus. Let's put out that here's the places we'd like to have, but have our events. Request for a proposal, like who wants to host it? Let's figure out the best venues, the best opportunities we could get for a playing experience. Let those people raise their hand, and then once we have that, fill in the gaps in between of like where the dates and places and things like that are. So that's something we're hoping we can elevate the experience by finding the partners that really want us versus just like choosing legacy spots because we've done them there before. So yeah, like that's like one of the things where I don't know if it was because we didn't have a season, it changed that perspective, but I'm just like excited about taking that different tack to like, how do we put together this season so that we get the best venues, experiences, events we
Hmm.
can have. So that's one I'm excited about for 2021.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that change too because, I mean, just as a player, I think that the experience of like where you play is what makes all the tournaments more unique. Like when I play 18 of them, they all bleed together unless there's something interesting happening. And so when it just comes down to like, all right, I'm just in, some park in some city, that's one thing. But now it's like, oh, what other kind of opportunities can we bring in here? And a lot of times things stood out for like, oh yeah, we went to this park in this city and we looked at it on Google Maps and it looked fine, and then the grass was horrible, or the beach was super rocky, and so they stand out in this other way. So as opposed to like only having the knowledge that we can find off of a Google image or the community itself, like if you wanted to host one in Georgia, you go like, hey Harding, what where would we do this? And now it's like, hey, city of Atlanta, where's a good place for this? Like, if you want to show this off, where would you show this off? And I think like we're just going to end up with such a better product because of that.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, like obviously right now our numbers in the US aren't great, but I'm hopeful that 2021 allows us to do something in a big way. I think, and that's the thing, even with 2020 is like, we tried to take it as far as we could where we felt it would be safe, but like we never want, like we really want to get back to playing. Like that's what we want to do. I miss being at events. I miss seeing everybody. Like I and I know Nora, like she's the same exact way.
Mm-hmm.
Like she wants to be out there running the event. So we're hopeful, and we're really excited. And I think that like, even though 2021 for us didn't happen, I mean, 2020 for us didn't happen, I think there's a lot of great learning that came from it. And I think the sport continues and continued to develop, in spite of every circumstance that was thrown at it. And I think, as a sport, we're in a really great spot right now. And like, this isn't specific to us. Like every sport is dealing with like, how do we keep everyone engaged? How do we run big events? How do we do this safely? So yeah, I'm not like I'm not 2020 hasn't gotten me like down on where we are. I'm actually like super pumped about what it's let us be able to do, even though maybe that's like a silver lining sort of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the stuff that came out of it's really cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all we can do is focus on, the positives that come out of this and, turn this into some sort of a learning experience. But I don't even think it was like just a learning experience for you guys. Like, I think it was a learning experience for the entire community. And, it, it didn't just it didn't just ask or it didn't just force you guys to kind of take a step back and look at what you want to do. Like it made all of us do that, and the community had to kind of step up. Like it threw the onus on them. Like with all of a sudden, like there's no SRA events. Like so, what happens? Do we are we not playing at all? Are we not communicating as a community at all? Is there no content? And
Well, I think
in,
content's gotten even better.
that's exactly it. Like we
That's something you can do from your couch. Yeah, you can film yourself. You can make tutorials. Like Preston's done an amazing job growing
yeah,
HTR,
amazing.
and it's just cool to see that stuff sort of take off.
Right. And so, it kind of threw the onus on the community a little bit where it was like, look, no one else is going to do it. So like if this is what you want to see and like if this is what you want for your community, like you're going to have to be a part of the process here. And it really raised the bar. I mean the the level of content that like, Ryder just himself raised it to with, the production value put into HTR, like that's pushing my content forward. And like trust me, I'm nowhere near hitting him. I don't I don't have a DSLR about it or anything, but it's just making everybody step their game up a little bit from like, screen recording their phone and then putting together a rough chop of, some points in iMovie on their phone. It was like a great starting point, but it's cool that we've just like raised the bar there. And then I think also to some extent too, I think the community has really seen like how much work Spikeball Inc. does with all that they do to put on this season, because all of a sudden the community didn't have you guys to run any of this stuff, and it's like, oh, this is what it's like if like Spikeball Inc. weren't running the events and weren't throwing the money at the events. Like this is what the product would actually be. And I think people, are so ready to get back to it because they're like, man, these things were great,
Yeah, we're ready to get back to it too, for sure. Yeah, and like I know one, you're talking about content stepping up. Like you did that thing about like the personal mic you could wear,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, yes, it's like it lets you remember the things like when you're so busy, you don't, you're like, that's good enough. But it's like, oh yeah, if we could just hear when they were saying the score, this would make the experience of watching, 10 times better. If you can just get that little bit of audio.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just like some of this stuff is like really low hanging fruit that when you're just so busy, keeping everything, keeping all the plates spinning, that sometimes you don't have the time to figure out like, oh, this mic is pretty cheap, makes a ton better, and it doesn't affect me playing. And that, probably makes some of the broadcasts and things you do get that much better because of it.
Yeah, no, I actually do think that's like a pretty quintessential example. And like it's also I mean even just down to skills right now, like everyone's sitting there going like, all right, like I'm not competing as much, like what's the thing that I can finally work on now that it's not just like maintaining my body or, doing a bunch of reps because I got to play every single weekend. It's like, oh, I've got some focused time right now where I can just breathe and evaluate what's going on and be like, this is what I want to do. Like it's not just like keeping up anymore. It's like it's just like this whole new build phase for our community.
Yeah, I think the scary thing will be when somebody comes out of their basement lab with just some crazy shot serve, whatever, where it's like, where did this come from? And that they've just been like honing it for months in a laboratory.
Yeah, I'm partially terrified that that's gonna wind up being Hilltop. They just they
Yeah.
I just like if I was quarantined in with my partner who was, as dedicated as those two are and as innovative and as talented, like Jesus Christ, the things that can come out of that. So yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to just having them back in general too. But yeah, I think that's gonna happen. And
And their highlight videos have already been kind of scary of what they've been doing to competition.
right, and like I don't know, I've got this feeling that they're still holding something back because they're like, you know what, this isn't the SRA events yet. Like, we're just playing these locals, and I can already, beat top players in the world 21-6 with what I'm doing or whatever. So like I'm just gonna breathe for a
Wild.
second. Like it's wild, wild stuff. Well, one thing that I have to hit on for the community because they'll kill me if I don't is the whole concept of rule changes. This has been I think that I think every year we talk about rule changes, and I think everyone's got their ideas, but this year hit different in that regard. Like it is constant, and I think a lot of the conversation was actually more productive than usual. I think people have actually taken some steps to do things, but just like as a baseline in your mind, like what's the current state of our sport in this area, at least to you?
All right. So to me, there's two buckets of things. One bucket are what are the rules that slow down the game, create confusion, create arguments, make it hard to self-regulate because they're too subjective and too open to interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think there's a bunch of rules there that, has in some ways does have to do with the entertainment value of both watching and playing the sport because no one wants to be arguing, for 5 minutes every time a ball is served. But it's really about making it clear and uniform, and every time you play, you're going to get you're going to have that same result. You're going to have a panel of experts would agree. There's not this sort of like there's two sides to arguing a play that we have recorded and no one can still agree on what happened. So I think that's a set of rules that actually gets talked about a little less, but is almost equally as important to the other set of rule changes, which focus on what can we do to better balance our sport, because we have such an overpowered offense that it creates all these other symptoms. And I think where different people argue different things, and it gets a little lost, is that a lot of like negative side effects, they're not inherent. They're because of this imbalance, right? Like serve ball isn't, like people aren't double faulting, 40% of the time because they can't get the ball on the net because it's too hard to serve. It's because it's too hard to play defense. And so the reaction to that is I have to hit the greatest serve in the world because it's worth getting a double fault for the opportunity to get an ace. And I think that's where we really need to put our effort is not like, necessarily nerfing serving or, anything like that, but we need to allow defense to have a chance. That's what draws. I think that's what drew most people into the game. It's when you get that first great rally, when you're diving, when you feel like an athlete, when you feel like every play you have a chance to touch the ball. It's like, that's what drew me in personally. I love diving around. I love those plays that get crazy and chaotic. I love watching them when they're highlights. And if we can't, if those are a once in a blue moon thing, if you play a tournament and you get one of those, it's not as satisfying as it needs to be. So it's like, how do we, and I posted, my sort of chart that I put together of nationals data from 2014 to present. And I think the big like watershed moment is when rallies and aces switch spots. When those two lines intersect, you create serve ball. It's saying you're more likely to score a defensive point by getting an ace than you are by playing defense. And that moves everything in that direction. So now you focus more on getting aces. You have more double faults. You have less defense. You have less, less rallies. And it's tough because those are the elements that draw people into the game, that make it fun to watch, that make it fun to play. And that ultimately like help us grow our sport and have it get where we want to be, where there's, we're playing in big stadiums, there's sponsors, it's on TV. Like it needs to be the sport that you fell in love with. And so, yeah, I mean, like, that's just my general take on like, what is the landscape of rules? I think that was your question, but maybe I went on a tangent. I don't know. You could redirect me if you want.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think people just kind of want to know, what the theory behind this is a lot. And I think you kind of spoke to that. And I agree with you that like to the extent that it is now, our incentives are just too out of whack, where like you're just too much more likely to win off of a serve or an ace as opposed to defense. But one part that like I don't want to get lost in this conversation is the fact that like I think in order to solve this problem we have to be able to define it, and I think the way that people talk about the problem ill defines the issue itself. Like when people are on Facebook threads saying like, well, anytime that there's like, just an in-system ball, it's a 1 2 3 put away 99% of the time. And I'm like, well, that's not the case at all. Like, in fact, in terms of playable points, like our rally percentage in like if you just take out missed serves, all of a sudden jumps to like 8%. And so there's a big difference between 1 and 8 there. Especially if your ace percentage is somewhere around like 18 to 20. And
Yeah, I
so
think I'd even go and take that a step further. Is like look at the places where rallies came, take out all the missed serves, and try to find the percent that happened not as a result of a bad first touch, right? Because then what you're really saying is like, hey, like if do you have a chance at playing defense if you don't rip a serve? Like if you don't force a bad touch on the first serve, can you play defense? And actually, like I don't know the data there. I think that would be an interesting one to look at. But I've seen, even watching some college footage of almost like a gentleman's second serve. Like I've seen people play defense off it and get those touches. So it's not impossible. But I think that like, yeah, there's lots of ways you can break it down to understand more about the dynamics and what's happening. And I think sometimes we talk too much in like absolutes without true understanding of the nuance. But I think another thing to be careful about, and this goes back to like we were talking about earlier, is like to not let perfect be the enemy of good.
right.
If like when we find something that, this moves it in the right direction and it still keeps it fun to play, and it doesn't mean that the game takes 20 minutes longer, but it doesn't do X, Y, and Z. It's like, okay, well, let's make progress. Let's get it better before we just do nothing. Right. That's where my head is at.
Yeah. Well, and I completely agree with that too. And I think in terms of balancing, like, I mean, you said that there was, that you can see in the graph where that shift happens, where all of a sudden, serving and rally switch places. I don't even think that like we necessarily have to switch it back or like try to harken back to 2014 when like that was the case, or 2015 when that was the case. But I do think that like we just have to close that gap, because the difference in, if your ace percentage or if, yeah, like if you're more likely to score by 2 to 1 off a serve, then like, yeah, it's worth, burying a couple of double faults into your game in order to go for that. But what if it's like, 1.5? What if it's 1.2 and you have 2 serves? Like now all of a sudden you get the opportunity to like rip the first one, but maybe seeing that the stats actually aren't as bad as you think it is on the second serve, maybe it's worth learning a second serve that's not, some crazy rip and is a little bit more consistent, more akin to like a tennis second serve, where you're just trying to keep the person a little bit off balance to give yourself an actual chance. And I think like Skylar actually does this beautifully, and like because he's so good at defense, it winds up, working a lot. A lot of times his second serve is just like this like mini fuego with a ton of spin. It's real slow, but he's just trying to get you to pass it just a little bit off so that he can just gain a little bit of advantage. And I think anecdotally what you were talking about with like, the person that puts on a gentleman serve, as soon as you do that, like your mentality has completely shifted away from this mentality of like, if I don't get an ace right here, I'm not going to win the point. So I'm going to put all my effort into like making this serve happen and focusing there, as opposed to like, if I'm just dinking it on the net, I'm not getting that ace. So like
Yeah.
now I'm 100% invested in the defense. And I think sometimes that's like half the issue too, is this mental side of it. And that's why like I think defining the problem better is so important, because otherwise, yeah, like you may as well just sit there and rip a serve and then stand there and let the other team have it if that's your mentality. Like, and that's horrible.
Well, and another thing to consider is that like when we're looking at that chart from nationals, that's at a macro level. And so every team is different. It just averages to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at a micro level, it's like, okay, that might not be true for you. And if you're keeping your own stats, then like you can, like a team like Anchored maybe, it's like, oh, you should definitely be putting on that second serve, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it changes team to team. And the other thing I would say is just like to put a little more color on like that chart, I think revealed a lot, but one of the things it did not show was 2019 national. And I watched all the games to grab that data, which was fun and time consuming,
Mm-hmm.
and another project that, was like good to have some extra time to do.
Yeah. And
But
thank you for doing that, by the way. The community thanks you. It's a lot of time.
yeah, but like 2015 nationals, by the stats alone, you'd be like, oh, that was a really fun one to watch. But me subjectively, I much more enjoyed watching 2019 nationals.
Right.
And the difference doesn't get captured in the stats because some of the stats were like, aren't defined specifically enough to show certain things. But the way those teams reacted on serve receive, the things that they needed to do to get the ball back, the fact that every time a serve was hit, like the crowd like held their breath to see like what was going to happen. And some of these amazing things they did, like those just get captured as a 1-2-3 put away, even though it's infinitely more impressive than the 1-2-3 putaways we were seeing in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do get those rallies, again, it was just like incredible. Now there were some great rallies in 2015, but in the time in between and just those normal points, it was just like, all right, the serve gets on and the team puts it away. And that really stepped up for our sport of how dynamic it is, that now it's not just like the guy's waiting to receive the serve. It's like you're worried for that team every time the serve's coming. And that I think is like a big advantage of where our sport is like if we can get those rallies back and also have serve receive be so, be like, that anticipation of the pitcher about to like, what pitch is he going to throw? Like, what's it going to look like? I think our sport's even further along. Like what you said, it's not about getting back to 2014. There's a lot of things right now in 2020 that are better for the sport, but there are some that are worse, and we just need to balance that.
Yeah. Well, I think you're exactly describing, one thing that I try to remind people too is that like the quality matters so much too. Like we can get bogged down in numbers, but if our ultimate goal is to like get rallies so that the sport becomes more watchable, like we can't just maximize for rallies and think that it'll still be watchable necessarily. And so you're right. Like there's such a different dynamic. Like people are playing the game so much faster. Everyone looks so much more athletic right now. And so my fear with some of these rule changes is like I don't want to eat into that. Like I want athletes to like I think everyone expresses their own personal style so much in this game right now. Like I can watch the shadow of Jarrett hitting and the shadow of Peter John hitting and tell the difference.
That's because Peter John Shadows like has 9-foot arms. So
well, there's that too. But like put him and then put Drucker. Like it, like everyone hits that little bit differently. And while we can agree that there's a little bit of a balance issue, like I do think it's important to like not lose that like that qualitative aspect of it too. And like we want this to be super exciting and expressive, and that's something that like just gets lost in numbers. And so how do you kind of think about the balance there? Like obviously you were just saying that like you need to, but to what extent is it worth taking a hit on that in order to achieve rallies as well?
Yeah, well, I would say it doesn't, like they don't have to work in a closed system.
Right.
Like it's not zero sum there. Like so, and I'll do a plug for David Louie, Data Collection Committee.
Yes, sir.
Who's has already done a ton of great work, just putting some structure, making sure like all these ideas have a way that we can look at them and really know if they're helping positively, negatively, or doing nothing. And everybody who's interested in moving the sport forward should just like hop on that and help out where they can. But yeah, a lot of that, like even in the name, it's about the data, but it's about both quantitative and qualitative. So there's surveys coming out after you do the testing of like, was this more fun to play? Did you feel like an athlete? Like asking the questions that really let us evaluate, hey, if you had to play with a hand tied behind your back and you're only allowed to hit overhead. And it's like, there's certainly a point where it's like the solution is worse than the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to get there, but I don't think it has to be a compromise. Like, I think we can find things that make it more fun while, allowing for that creativity. And there will be ones that are a little bit borderline, and there will be some trade-offs. And that's where it's important to have those conversations and to understand like, well, what's the net gain from this? So for instance, we didn't used to have a pivot rule at all, really. Like you could take steps up to the serve. And that kind of became an issue because if you remember, the rule used to say, yeah, if you take steps up into your serve, you just have to do it in a straight line,
Yeah.
right? Like, wait, how do we define a straight line? How do we know that this guy didn't step a little bit off and gain some angle, or what angle was he walking on? And so we established a pivot rule, right? And you could argue, well, that all the people who used to run up, who used to hit a jump serve, whatever, like it took that away. And that's true, but it still allowed for a ton of creativity. And I think the thing about creativity is that sometimes constraints actually proliferate creativity. Constraints actually push creativity. When you have to work within a specific confine, and you see that now with the pivot rule and the different ways people spin and bend and do everything else, it's like, I would say the fact that they have to keep their feet down has led to more advanced and nuanced and different, cool different ways that people have their own style than when you could walk up, right? So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's certainly something that needs to be taken into consideration. And you can certainly push it too far if you just have blinders on and just like this, we need to move this one number. It's not about moving one number. It's about creating a better playing experience.
Yeah, I actually think that's like a really great example of a rule change because like that was constraining but did in fact lead to more creativity. Now, someone who actually would want to bring the approach rule back, ideally, I understand the problems with it, but I really liked that there was like that third dimension to it, that it wasn't just left and right, that there was that like approach a little bit, but it was like a worthwhile trade-off to like clarify rules, and it really didn't impact the game all that much in general. And it still did allow people like me to serve over the top without doing like a massive approach. I just had to, go from back foot to front foot. And so, but like, I think that's a good thing, but specifically with that, I'm always weary about limiting space as opposed to limiting like things that like legal motions with your body or something like that. So like a worse version of that to me would be like, instead of a pivot, you just start in the center, but you have to serve between these two lines. And so there's a limit to how far you could reach or something like that. I would rather see like stuff like that get pushed. Like that pushes boundaries, that like also invites like freak athletes in to be able to do that thing that no one else could do.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, I mean, that's what you see in basketball. Like, I like watching Shaq because I'm not Shaq, and like it's crazy to just watch what he could do. And so one rule change that like I think is one of the more prominent ones that we're considering here is this 1 foot circle around the net. I'm worried about constraining the space in which players can move. Do you share any of that, or are you like less worried about conceptually things like that?
I'll say I think it's a really promising modification. I think that in many ways, like when we're looking at rule changes, we don't want to change the game fundamentally. we wanted, and we're really trying to give defense an advantage. And when you look at like what happens on most points that are 1, 2, 3 put away, it's that the defense did not even touch the ball. It's not that the ball was hit over their head. It's not that they had a hitting error or passing error or anything like that. It's that they didn't even have a chance to touch the ball because the hitter is hitting into a space where they are not. And so how do we give defense a chance? It's like, well, they need to have a better way to kind of see where the hitter's going. And if you can't get right over the net, that really helps, you can still hit all those shots. They become a little harder. The set needs to be a little better, but it definitely helps show where the hitter is going to go and give them that chance to touch it. It's not like we're putting a boundary around the sport. It's not like where you can't hit it out of bounds. We're not saying you can't move around and like eliminating that 360-degree nature that's like so cool about the sport. But it is giving them more of a chance. It seems feasible from like an implementation perspective. And I think there's probably also some benefits to it that are maybe just, not the intention, but nice to have. So, that it kind of clears people off of just like the hovering right over the net, might create less hinders, might create more view of what's going on. So yeah, like that's something we're testing, and I hope that like we find that people play it, and one, it gives defense more of a chance. Two, they really enjoy playing it, and also that people really like watching it. They're just having more fun. If those boxes don't get checked off, if it's like, yeah, this created a couple more defensive touches, a couple more rallies, but really we hate it, then that's not a winner. But I think it's a promising one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, conceptually, I'm with you on a lot of that. I guess I think I'm much more on the like conservative end with, changing rules than most people. And so I guess like I would just want to see how this plays out over a decent amount of time before going to this, because like I think this is a bigger rule change than almost anything else that's being proposed. I mean, certainly closer to to or it's certainly a bigger change than like all the other stuff that's being proposed that's like really on the margins, or really just like, all right, we're implementing a new rule. Like this is limiting a capacity of how you hit. So for me, like I would want to see like a solid amount of data on this. What's like a solid amount of data to you? Because like Skylar and I were talking about this while, playing some Halo one night, and he was just like, yeah, what's that number? Like, is it 20 games? Is it 200 games? Is it 2,000 games? And then, what kind of results do you need to see? Do you need to see them double? Do you need to see them go up by 1.5? Do you need to see them triple? Like, what are some of the like metrics in general that you would be like hoping to at least see?
Well, I mean, first, I think the test groups matter. So I think it's
Yeah.
important, like I think the problems amplify at the top. And so you want to see, can you get some top players to get some solid data on this? And you also want a spectrum of players as well, but it's really important to like where the problem is the greatest, make sure you have that, a test group that reflects those skill levels.
Mm-hmm.
There's also been the question of like, would this be implemented across all divisions or for like the top divisions? I think that is more determined by the data across like how it affects different players. If it turns out to be a good thing for all divisions and it improves the experience for all divisions, then yeah, it's probably like, why would we not want to? If it turns out like, hey, it could increase rallies in one spot and decrease it in another just based on skill level. So that's an important thing to learn. But in terms of how much data, I think, one, we want the top players. We want different groups of players. So it's not just, one combination of attributes that it works for and it doesn't work for a different style player. Because at the top, there's still many different types of and styles of play. So we want to see how that affects. And yeah, it's like we want to make sure the data is valid, but I think what's also important to consider is that we're not, I think we talk about rule changes as if, were they to happen, uh, they need to happen across the board in every event ever, and like no one could ever do anything differently. And that doesn't, necessarily need to be the case. Like
Hmm.
there can be an event that plays with the rule. There could be certain events that play with the rule. Eventually, we want the rule to be adopted across the board, but that rollout can be, can come from experience. And also, even if it is across the board from the beginning, of any new rule, it can always go back. If we learn something new, it's like we're not etching this in stone. Like this year, we had no events. So having a season that, had some events that started one way and then we found out it didn't work and changed to another way, that's better than having nothing. So like, I think it's about progress and we don't want to sit on it. We don't want to wait on it. Um, we do want to do enough due diligence and be responsible enough that we're getting it right and we're not, um, you know, we're not throwing all things out of whack. But I, I think we just have to understand how young this is as a as a sport and recognize like, okay, we see that there's a real problem right here. It's not fixing itself. It needs some sort of correction. And if we think we have something that we've done the due diligence and shows positive signs, let's get it out there. Let's get it tested. Let's figure out the right way to roll it out where you know where we could get it going and move in the right direction. And if it turns out that was the wrong direction, like we can, we can correct that. We're not, it's not set in stone.
Yeah, I think I'm just far less comfortable with like rolling something out and then it not being a not being the way to go and having to go backwards. And I think when when things are smaller like that, like if we did, sloppy first touch and we decided like, oh wow, this actually, we thought it would eliminate gray area, it really added gray area. Like, okay, fine. Like that's happening so infrequently in terms of like percentage of points played. But when I'm when I'm looking at especially this one with the hitting circle, like not only is this going to happen almost every single point, it might happen multiple times every single point. Like it's impacting the like play throughout a point even.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so that's like the impact of this rule change is felt beyond just the initial 1 2 3. It's felt in the return from the net from 50 feet off as well. And so that's why like especially something like this, like I would just want to see like a solid amount of testing. I'd want to see really promising results for it, and then just like also over time, like what do players wind up experiencing once they've tried this over a course of months, as opposed to just like, yeah, like I played it, 4 times for a week. I thought it was an improvement, and everyone across the country does that, and then we go like, all right, yeah, we're gonna move. You might get a lot of games, but like you you don't really have any like beginnings of like a meta development around it either. And I think this is so shifting.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a bigger one than like a sloppy first touch, right? Where
Hmm.
it happens, somewhat infrequently. That being said, it deserves like more behind it, right? It deserves a different approach than a smaller one. But yeah, I think that we can figure out, is this moving in the right direction? Does it look like it's a good thing? And I think that the thing that this year's shown is like I think people are ready for to try something. Like we've known for a while that it was moving this way, and I think there was more sort of like, hey, no, things will just correct themselves. Let's just see. And I think the let's just see is like, all right, it's not right. And so yeah, I 100% agree with you. This is a big change. It would affect every point. And so like that needs to definitely be taken into consideration if it's one that we're going to adopt.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I'm glad that you got to kind of speak on that a little bit. I know that's like some of the questions that I get the most, from the community and stuff like that. Just being on the board, and I, I think people want to know where you stand specifically on that, and also with your having your ties to the company and all that. Like, I just think it's important to, just kind of know where people are standing, and be encouraging people to be a part of the process too with this too. So that's
Yeah,
kind
so
of
I'll
cool.
plug it again.
Yeah.
Data collection committee, David Louie, like there, that's a great way to make sure that both quantitatively and qualitatively we're getting results from all across the board. And yeah, that'll be super helpful if people get on board with that. I know a lot of people, want to see this change. So it would be awesome if, they could also help just do what they can to either test it out, record their games, fill in some simple data around it, and let us get a better understanding of, hey, is this working, or were our assumptions off?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, now it's time to, be a part of the change you want to see, and, be a part of the conversation. Like, I know that I'm going to be testing this out, even though I find it to be, a less promising thing personally, but like, I want to experience what it's like. I want to give my feedback, and now there's like a form for you to do that that isn't the comment section on Facebook. And so yeah, no, reach out to David. There's good stuff going on there. That there's Facebook groups. There's all this stuff. So definitely go be a part of that. It's been fun to be a part of that process as well. All right. Well, thank you for all this time. I want to leave you with one question, then we'll get your let's go, and we'll get out of here. If you could snap your fingers and it would be done, what community effort would you want fully underway right now?
What community effort?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to keep it like vague like that, or just like if you could snap your fingers, like what would you want people to be doing right now to like move the sport forward?
Okay, so maybe I jumped this too soon with my last comment, but I love the independent organization of the data collection committee. The idea that, hey, we we know what we know what we want this sport to be. We know we have to work together to get there. We want to make data informed decisions and include a broad spectrum of voices. I would love to see our whole community participating in that, with both their ideas and helping test the ones that rise to the top. I think that just lets us move past the noise and like really find what's going to drive us in the right way, so that we don't have just like circular conversations that seem to just repeat and repeat and repeat, but we have things that move us forward, even if that movement forward is just in small little increments. Progress is progress. And I love the initiative of independent groups coming together to like have a process around collecting data, understanding our sport more, and moving it forward. So I already pitched it like 3 times, but yeah, I love how our community bands together like that, and that this was a thing. And I've tried to help as much as I can, share what I know, and what I can do to help them get off the ground. But this isn't like, it's not my thing. This is that whole David and the whole group, who did this. So I just think it's awesome. Oh, I think you're on mute, Chris. Should I just do a let's go?
Am I working? Is it no? Nothing? What happened? Wait, when you talk, what happens? I think you're still live. How about now? Yes? No?
No, I can't hear anything.
No? Nothing? Jesus Christ, what happened?
I mean, at least it happened. I think we were pretty much we got most of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I hope we did. Can you hear me now? No? Still no?
I can't hear you.
Did you mute your computer? How about now?
No. Although I could read your lips that you said, "How about now?" Maybe it's
Yeah.
watching Deaf U.
Yeah. Shoot. Yeah. I guess. I think I'm still recording on my end, so this is really funny.
I do have that meeting at 12:30 that I have
Yeah.
to do.
All right. Yeah. Give me a let's go, and we'll call it.
Yeah. I guess if there's anything else you need me to do, if you want to just put it in the chat. Otherwise, this was fun. All right. Let's go.
Woo! All right. Talk to you later,
I
man.
actually heard your woo. It was just like really low.
Oh, weird. Okay, so maybe I'm
I
just
don't know
like,
what it is.
yeah.
Anyways.
Shoot. All right.
Yeah, thanks.
All right.
I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Yeah. All right. See you, man.
Bye.
Well, that was weird, huh?